Do you need a master's degree to get a job in data science? Well, I can tell you in 2 seconds, no, most of the time you don't. But please don't leave and watch this video in full because there's many caveats and important information surrounding that answer. So, first of all, I do want to start this off with saying I have interviewed for many of the top companies in the world. I'm not going to name them, but you could probably guess many of which who they are, and I don't have a master's degree. So there you go. Is that the answer? No, it's not that simple. Firstly, many of the jobs were listed at those companies where a master's degree was not claimed to be required. And this is becoming more and more common in data science and machine learning. But many jobs from top companies, medium companies, small level companies are saying that you need a minimum master's degree, and many say you need a PhD as well. So, what is actually the truth? Well, I can say sometimes when a job or a company puts a job application out there and wants people to apply, sometimes when they say a master's or PhD is required, they are telling the truth and they won't accept someone that doesn't have those qualifications. That's true sometimes. Unfortunately, this is not true all of the time. And so, even if you see this requirement as a master's or PhD, sometimes they're just putting that, sometimes they have literally copied and pasted, someone else's requirements because it's a big file to write. It takes a lot of time. Sometimes they literally just copy and paste something and not know what it is. Sometimes HR is not knowing what they're doing. Sometimes managers are being lazy and also not knowing what they're doing. And also sometimes they may actually know this. This is probably the most common one. Probably the most common thing they do is that they do list very high requirements so that they only get people, or at least they mostly get people that do have those requirements or better. And so then they have to only look at people that are extremely qualified. Because let's be honest here, you don't necessarily, you almost certainly don't need the knowledge that's associated with a master's or PhD. You can, not to say, not to belittle people that have a master's or PhD, many of them are much smarter than me myself. But let's be honest here. You can learn a ton of information, like infinite information on your own, on the, books, on courses, on your own study, on your own projects, on your own work, on talking with other people on their projects and their work and their experiences. And so, do you really need to have that piece of paper yourself to be able to do these jobs? Odds are probably not. But what it does say is that you can really persevere, especially that's a big reason why companies and the general public really likes universities and like highly recognized universities, because usually what that means is they are hard to get into, and they are hard to, once you get into, they're hard to get out of as well and to get through that. And so that means you've really persevered and probably learned a heck of a lot. But anyways, sometimes these companies will be loose about the requirements, and that when they actually list that you need a master's or a PhD, they'll be a little bit slack about that and accept a broad variety of people, and other times they'll have it listed and be pretty rigid and not budge about it. But regardless of all of those different types of things, how about we just talk about what you generally need most of the time? Well, a master's degree is a good way to just say, like, yeah, I've got that covered. And of course, a PhD pretty much says, yeah, I've got it all here. It doesn't necessarily mean you're the best fit for a job and you still need to learn a ton on your own. But I'd have to say that in terms of a requirement for a job, you're pretty much set there. At one level lower academically, a master's is still most of the time, you can say, yeah, I'm probably able to at least get an interview for many of these companies and many positions. One step lower academically, a bachelor's degree, even still, especially if it's from, an institution that many people have heard of and that is relatively credible, then yes, a bachelor's degree, especially in something close to statistics, machine learning, computer science in general, your chances are still pretty high most of the time. One level down from that, well, that means either like a coding boot camp or your own Coursera courses and own projects only. Now, this is when it starts to be a little bit more difficult. And it's definitely not impossible. I will not phrase it as impossible. And there's many living proof out there that show that this is something that people do, where you go and take Coursera courses, you go and build your own portfolio, and hopefully, you have a job somewhere else or some sort of internships. and then you can get in that way. This happens, and people do this all the time. But I would say that your chances are lower this way. And so I do encourage anyone that is in the position to, get a bachelor's degree at least, and a master's degree, if you have like a bachelor's in something that's not super related to like statistics and machine learning and data science, and you want to do a master's, well, that's a good way to kind of, take whatever existing education that you have and kind of transform it into, a more statistics based one for these companies and for your own benefit, then I think a master's can really help you there. If you don't have a bachelor's at all, and if you are kind of past the point where you're considering a bachelor's, please understand that it's very possible to get these jobs, but also understand it might take you a little bit longer. You're going to really, really need to know your stuff. You might even need to start working for free and start with an internship for a company, just cold calling them and emailing saying, "Hey, I'm willing to work for free. I want to get into this space. I want to know, what you're doing and get close with you and learn about all the stuff that they're doing." The bottom line is that any higher level of education you can get, like high school to bachelor's, bachelor's to master's, master's to PhD, PhD to postdoc, whatever you want to call it, yes, that is going to help you out a ton and just check more boxes in many companies' eyes, as well as any sort of level of prestige amongst any of these institutions. A good high school, a good, bachelor's program, a good master's, a good PhD, all of those prestigiousness is going to help a ton as well. A PhD from Harvard, it's going to help. I don't even really care what it is, to be honest. So that is all true. But if you do not have at least a bachelor's, your chances are a little bit harder. And amongst that, in terms of the going up from bachelor's to master's, master's to PhD, there starts to be a bit of a drop off in terms of like what's really necessary there. Although it definitely helps, like it definitely does. Going from any sort of level of education above and prestige, it does help. But there's a bit of a drop off after getting a bachelor's, in my opinion, and before, like if you go one step below a bachelor's, like high school and whatever at that step, well, it's still all possible at this step. I think it's much better off if you can get a bachelor's, but there's many, many people that have proven that you don't need a bachelor's degree to do all this stuff. You need to do the grind. You need to do the Coursera courses or read the books, check the video description if there's stuff you want to see there. There is so many different opportunities for you to get into these companies without a bachelor's. So, just to state it in one line, no, you don't need a master's. I don't have a master's, and I've interviewed with some of the biggest companies, and so that should say it right there. Any higher level of education will help, but a bachelor's degree is really going to help, and a master's will really help. Let me know if that helped answer your questions. If you have one, please feel free to drop it in the comments and I will respond. And have a great day. Please have a great day. I love you so much. Bye bye.